Daniel Carter grabbed the emergency door handle with his bare hands, while the metal was still hot enough to blister skin. He could feel it, the sear, the burn, the way his palms screamed at him to let go. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see 2 feet in front of his face. His lungs were pulling in air that tasted like jet fuel and melting wire. Somewhere behind him, people were screaming for him to come back. A firefighter grabbed his arm and yanked hard. Daniel yanked harder. Because inside that burning jet, someone was still alive. And the only reason Daniel Carter knew exactly how to force that emergency door open. The exact sequence, the exact pressure point. The mechanical weakness in the locking mechanism that nobody else on the ground knew about was because he had spent 11 years of his life designing it. For the company that fired him. For the woman trapped inside who looked him in the eye 3 months ago and told him he didn't belong there. He got the door open. He went in anyway. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see where in America this story lands. And if you've never subscribed to this channel, this is the story that'll make you do it. Don't go anywhere. The call came at 4:42 in the morning. Daniel was in the middle of making Emma's breakfast scrambled eggs, toast with the crusts cut off the way she liked, orange juice in the blue cup because she refused to drink it from any other, when his phone buzzed on the counter. It was his supervisor, Grant Pullman. Carter, Sophia wants you in the executive suite. 9th floor now. Daniel stood there for a second with the spatula still in his hand. In 11 years at Whitmore Aviation, he'd never once been called to the executive suite. Not for a promotion, not for a review, not for anything. The 9th floor was where decisions got made. Real decisions. The kind that involved numbers most people never saw in their lifetimes. Now, he said. She said, now, Carter. He turned off the stove. He looked at the eggs, half-cooked, still moving in the pan. He thought about Emma upstairs, still asleep. Her dark hair fanned out across the pillow the way her mother's used to be. He set the spatula down. Tell her I'm on my way. He dropped Emma at school first. He wasn't going to skip that. Not for Sophia Whitmore. Not for the entire board of directors combined. Every morning for the past 4 years since the accident, since the hospital, since the funeral, Daniel had been the one to walk Emma through those front doors. He'd made that a promise, not out loud, not to anyone who could hold him to it. Just to himself, standing at a graveside in the rain with a 6-year-old girl holding his hand and asking why mommy wasn't going to come home anymore. Some promises you don't break. He walked Emma to her classroom, hugged her twice because she asked for 2, and watched her disappear through the door with her purple backpack and her plastic model of a 747 she'd built herself and refused to leave at home. Then he drove to Whitmore Aviation's headquarters. He wore his good jacket, the dark navy one he saved for presentations. He'd pressed it the night before for a different meeting, a safety review with the systems team. But this would do. He had no idea he was walking into an execution. The executive suite smelled like money. That sounds like a joke, but it wasn't. It smelled like leather and cold air, and the kind of quiet that only exists when the carpet is thick enough to swallow sound. Daniel had been in a lot of offices over the years, hangars, control rooms, engineering bays, full of noise and grease and the honest smell of work. This was different. This was a room designed to make you feel small before anyone said a single word to you. There were 6 people seated around the conference table when he walked in. He recognized most of them. Richard Blake, VP of Operations Heavyset, always in a suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Margos Fielding from Legal, 2 board members he'd seen in company photos but never spoken to. One man he didn't recognize at all, in a charcoal suit, who didn't look up when Daniel entered. And at the head of the table, Sophia Whitmore. She was 36 years old, and she ran a company that employed over 4,000 people. Daniel had seen her speak at company town halls, composed, precise, the kind of person who chose every word like she was billing by the letter. She was not warm. She was not cold, exactly. She was efficient, the way a machine is efficient. She had her father's company, and she intended to make it 3 times what he'd built. She looked at Daniel when he walked in. She did not stand up. She did not gesture to a chair. She just looked at him, with that same expression she used for quarterly reports and contract negotiations, measuring, calculating, already 2 steps ahead. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Sit down." He sat. "We've reviewed your report," Richard Blake said, before Sophia could continue. He had a manila folder open in front of him, and he pushed it across the table toward Daniel as though it were contaminated. "The one you submitted 2 weeks ago regarding the XW9 fuel management system." "The safety report," Daniel said. He kept his voice level. He'd learned a long time ago that if you want people to hear what you're saying, you can't let them hear the fear underneath it. "I'd prefer we call it what it is," Richard smiled. "Of course." "The report identifies a critical flaw in the pressure regulation sequence," Daniel continued. He looked around the table as he spoke, not just at Richard, not just at Sophia, but at each of them, one at a time, because he wanted them all to be looking at him when he said this. When the XW9 exceeds 41,000 feet at sustained cruise speed, there's a documented irregularity in the fuel transfer between tanks 3 and 4. I ran the simulations 15 times. Every single time, the irregularity becomes a failure. Not a risk of failure, a failure. We are talking about complete fuel system compromise at altitude. Silence. Not the kind of silence that means people are thinking. The kind of silence that means everyone in the room already knows what they're going to say and they're just waiting for the performance to catch up. "Mr. Carter," Sophia said. Her voice was exactly the same. Level, composed, like she was reading off a spreadsheet. "We have our own engineering team. We've had 3 independent reviews of the XW9 systems. With respect, Ms. Whitmore, I've read 2 of those reviews. The third one, the one Blake's team commissioned in October, I was specifically excluded from." He paused. "I'd like to know why." Richard Blake's smile didn't change. "That's not relevant to this conversation. It's relevant to whether people are going to die," Daniel said. That landed differently. He saw it a flicker, just for a second, around the table. The board members shifted. The man in the charcoal suit finally looked up. But Sophia Whitmore didn't flicker, not even a little. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this company has been building aircraft for 31 years. We have the highest safety certification rating of any private aviation manufacturer in North America. Our engineers are among the most credentialed in the industry." "I know," Daniel said. "I'm one of them. You were one of them." She held his gaze. "An engineer with your level of experience should understand that a company cannot function when individual employees choose to escalate internal concerns to regulatory bodies without authorization." And there it was. Daniel felt it, a cold drop through his chest, the kind of physical feeling you get when something you suspected becomes something you know. He looked at her steadily. "I reported my concerns internally first. 3 times, in writing. When no one responded, I contacted the FAA. You went outside the company," Richard said. "I reported a safety violation. You created a liability," Richard said, his voice going flat now, the smile finally dropping. "You created a regulatory inquiry in the middle of a contract negotiation worth $6 billion. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any concept of what's at stake here?" Daniel was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "I have a concept of what's at stake if that plane flies." Sophia stood up. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't raise her voice. She smoothed the front of her jacket with one hand, and she picked up the folder, and she set it back down. And when she spoke, it was in the exact same tone she'd used for everything else, measured, final. The tone of a woman who had made her decision before he ever walked in the room. "An engineer should understand his role," she said. "Your role is not to determine company strategy. Your role is not to make decisions about regulatory compliance at the corporate level. Your role is to do the technical work you are assigned, within the parameters you are given." She paused. "You seem to have difficulty understanding that distinction." Daniel looked at her. He thought about Emma. He thought about the eggs he'd left half-cooked on the stove. He thought about the simulations he'd run 15 of them, every single one ending the same way. My role, he said quietly, is to make sure the planes don't fall out of the sky. Your role, Sophia Whitmore said, is over. Richard Blake opened a different folder and slid a document across the table. A termination agreement, already prepared, already notarized in 2 places. They'd had this ready before he walked in, probably the night before. Probably the moment his FAA report had landed on someone's desk. Security will escort you out, Richard said. You'll receive your severance by direct deposit within 10 business days. The NDA terms are standard. I'd encourage you to have an attorney review them before you. I'm not signing that, Daniel said. The room went very quiet again. Excuse me? Richard said. I'm not signing an NDA that prevents me from discussing a safety issue that could kill people. Daniel stood up. He was aware that his hands were completely steady, which surprised him. He thought he might be shaking. He wasn't. I'll accept the termination. I understand what you're doing, but I won't agree to stay silent about something that could cause a disaster. Richard started to say something. Sophia held up one hand, and he stopped. Just like that. That was the kind of power she had, the kind where she didn't need to raise her voice or repeat herself. She just moved her hand, and people stopped. She looked at Daniel. For the first time in the entire meeting, something in her expression shifted. Not regret, not doubt, something more like curiosity. Like she was looking at a specific kind of person she didn't encounter often. Like she was filing it away. Escort Mr. Carter out, she said. They gave him a cardboard box. Tan, medium-sized, the kind they kept in the supply closet specifically for this purpose. He understood, in some numb, distant part of his mind, that they must use these fairly often. He packed 11 years into it. 2 framed photos, one of Emma at age 5, sitting in the cockpit of a decommissioned 737 during an open house, grinning, like she'd just discovered the best thing in the world, one of Daniel and his wife, Sarah, at a company picnic the summer before she got sick. A coffee mug from the engineering team's 5th anniversary. A dog-eared copy of his FAA systems manual, the margins covered in his handwriting. A small model of the original Whitmore WA-4 that he'd built from scratch over 3 months just because he loved the design. He stood at his desk for a moment after it was all in the box. The desk where he'd spent the last 5 years. The engineering bay where he'd worked alongside people he genuinely liked, solving problems he genuinely cared about, doing work that mattered to him in a way he'd never been able to fully explain to anyone. Marcus Webb, his closest colleague, walked by the doorway and stopped dead when he saw the box. Danny, he said. The word came out stripped of everything except the emotion underneath it. It's fine, Daniel said. It's not, I know. Daniel picked up the box. Call me later. Marcus looked like he wanted to say 10 things at once and couldn't say any of them. He stepped aside. The security guard walked Daniel to the elevator. Rode down with him in silence. Walked him through the lobby, past the receptionist, who'd greeted him by name for 11 years and who now couldn't quite meet his eyes. Out through the glass doors, across the parking lot. At the edge of the lot, the security guard stopped. That was the boundary of his job. Daniel kept walking. He sat in his car for 22 minutes before he started it. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. Not the hot, immediate kind of anger that makes you do things you regret. He was sitting very still with the cardboard box on the passenger seat and the model of the WA-4 peeking out over the top. And he was thinking about the simulation data he'd submitted and about the fuel pressure charts he'd spent 3 weeks building and about the fact that somewhere right now the XW9 was in a hangar being prepped for its commercial debut. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. They're going to move forward with the rollout. Overheard Blake on the phone. June 14th. June 14th was 6 weeks away. Daniel stared at the text. He thought about the 41,000-foot threshold. He thought about the cascade failure, fuel transfer interrupted, backup pressure, valve overwhelmed. The way the whole system would collapse in a sequence that would give the pilots maybe 90 seconds to respond. Maybe less. He thought about all the people who might be on that plane. Then he started his car and went to pick up Emma from school. She knew something was wrong the second she saw him. Kids that age always do. They haven't learned yet how to pretend they don't notice things, and they don't understand why adults do. She stood at the edge of the schoolyard with her purple backpack and her 747 model in both hands, and she looked at him, and she said, "Dad." "What happened?" "I'll tell you in the car," he said. She climbed into the back seat. He watched her in the rearview mirror. As he drove the way, she held the plane model in her lap and looked out the window and waited. She was 9 years old, and she was the most patient person he knew. She'd learned patience the hard way. They both had. "I lost my job today," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then why?" "Because I told them something was wrong with one of their planes, and they didn't want to hear it." She turned the 747 over in her hands. "Was something wrong with it?" "Yes." "Are they going to fix it?" He paused just a half second too long. "I don't know." Another silence. The traffic light ahead of them turned red. Daniel stopped the car. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah, Bug? Are you still an engineer?" The question hit him somewhere he didn't have a name for. Not in his chest, not quite, somewhere deeper. The place where your identity lives, where the thing you've been for your entire adult life is stored. The thing that says this is who you are, this is what you do, this is your worth. He looked at her in the mirror. "I'm still your dad," he said. She thought about this for a second. Then she nodded, like that settled something. "Okay," she said. She went back to looking out the window. "Can we have pizza tonight?" He managed to smile. "Yeah," he said. "We can have pizza." The weeks that came after were the kind that don't have a shape when you're living them. They only make sense later, when you look back and realize what they were making you into. Daniel applied to 17 aerospace companies in the first month. He had 11 years of experience, a safety record with no marks against it, and 3 professional references, who were genuinely strong. He also had something else. His name attached to an FAA complaint against one of the most powerful aviation manufacturers in the country, filed while under employment, which had been quietly but effectively communicated to every major firm in the industry. The responses were polite. The responses were careful. The responses said things like, "We'll keep your application on file, and we're not currently expanding our engineering department," and, once, from a hiring manager he'd met at a conference and liked, a private message that simply said, "I'm sorry, Daniel. It's not me." He understood what it was. He took the delivery job in the second month. Amazon subcontractor routes, $9 an hour, his car on his own insurance. It paid enough to keep the lights on and Emma's health coverage current. She took a medication for her asthma that cost $400 a month without insurance. That was the number Daniel thought about every time he picked up a new delivery route. That was the number that kept him from feeling sorry for himself for too long. He got up at 5. He dropped Emma at school. He drove routes until 3:30, picked her up, made dinner, helped with homework, put her to bed. He read her 2 chapters every night they were working through Island of the Blue Dolphins, which Emma had chosen, and which Daniel was surprised to find genuinely moving. He turned the light out. He went back to the kitchen table, and he worked was on his own, submitting more applications, maintaining his engineering certifications, and, most nights, going back through the XW9 data. He couldn't stop. He knew what he knew. He knew the simulation results. He knew the failure sequence, and somewhere out there, June 14th was getting closer. He wrote to the FAA again. He was more specific this time, technical, detailed, with his simulation methodology included in an appendix. He wrote to the NTSB. He wrote to 2 aviation safety advocacy organizations whose contact information he found online. The FAA acknowledged receipt. The NTSB sent an automated response. The advocacy organization sent newsletters. Nobody called back. Marcus texted him sometimes. Late at night, careful texts that never said anything that could be used against anyone. Rollout is still on. Blake's been on the floor twice this week. Something's off. And later, they've been running the pressure tests differently. Shorter cycles. I think they're trying to get different numbers. Daniel read every message. He saved every one. He didn't know what else to do. The night before the flight, Emma asked him to help her with a school project. She was building a model airport, a diorama, really foam board and balsa wood, and painted cotton balls for clouds. It was due the next day, and she needed help with the control tower. They sat at the kitchen table together, after dinner, with a hot glue gun and a pile of craft supplies, and Daniel helped her build it piece by piece. Emma painted the runway markings with a tiny brush, her tongue between her teeth, the way it always was when she was concentrating. He shaped the tower from cardboard, and she painted it gray. They made small paper airplanes, his were better, and she made him show her twice how to fold them. They worked until almost 9 o'clock. When it was done, Emma stood back and looked at it with her hands on her hips, the way she always evaluated something she'd built. Then she looked up at him. "Dad, do you miss it?" "Miss what?" "Building real planes." "Not," she gestured at the diorama. "Small ones." He looked at the table between them. The tiny airport, the little paper planes, the cotton ball clouds. "Yeah," he said honestly. "Every day." She nodded slowly. "You should go back," she said. "You were good at it." "How do you know?" She gave him the look she'd inherited directly from her mother, the one that said, "Dad, come on." "Because you kept trying to fix the one that wasn't safe," she said. "People who are good at something keep trying, even when it's hard." He looked at her for a long moment, 9 years old. "You know what, Bug," he said. "You might be right." She went to bed. He cleaned up the craft supplies. He made himself coffee, and he sat at the kitchen table, and he looked at his phone, at the unanswered emails, at the safety report he'd filed 6 different ways over 3 months. He thought about the XW9. He thought about June 14th. He thought about Emma's voice. People who are good at something keep trying even when it's hard. He picked up his phone. He wrote one more email. To a journalist, this time an aviation reporter for a national publication whose byline he'd followed for years. He laid out everything, clean and clear, the way he'd been trained to write technical documents. He attached the simulation data. He attached the methodology. He attached the string of internal reports he'd filed, all 11 of them, before he went to the FAA. He hit send at 11:47 p.m. He didn't know if it would matter. He didn't know if anything he'd done over the past 3 months had mattered. He went to bed, and tomorrow, at 10:15 in the morning, the XW9 would take off for the most important flight of Sophia Whitmore's career. And Daniel Carter, who had tried everything, who had done everything right, who had lost everything anyway, would be loading packages into a van 4 miles from the airport when the sky broke open and changed everything. The morning of June 14th came in, quiet and ordinary, the way mornings do right before they become the kind you never forget. Daniel was already behind the wheel of his delivery van by 6:20 a.m. He had 43 stops on his route, his coffee going cold in the cup holder, and a radio station playing something country that he wasn't really listening to. Emma had made him a peanut butter sandwich and wrapped it in a paper towel, with a smiley face drawn on it in marker. He had it on the passenger seat, next to his route sheet. That was his whole morning. That was his whole life, right then. He'd been driving this route for 9 weeks. He knew every turn by memory now, every driveway, every dog that would lunge at the van when he slowed down, every elderly man who would be standing at the mailbox waiting because the package was the best part of his day. Daniel paid attention to those things. He always had. It was the engineer in him, the part that cataloged details, that noticed patterns, that couldn't look at a broken system without wanting to fix it. The radio cut to a traffic report. A segment about road closures near Hartsfield. Routine stuff. Daniel turned the volume up out of habit, not because he was listening, but because silence in a delivery van made the thinking too loud. He was thinking about the XW9. He'd been thinking about it every day for 3 months, but today was different. Today was the day. June 14th. The rollout flight. The one that would carry Sophia Whitmore and her entire senior leadership team to the international signing in Frankfurt. $6 billion riding on a handshake. The biggest contract in Whitmore Aviation's history. A decade of work reduced to a single flight. a flight in an aircraft that Daniel knew, with the certainty of 15 simulations and 11 years of systems knowledge, was going to fail. He pulled up to his third stop of the morning and sat in the van, with the engine idling for longer than he should have. A small brick house, a package with an Amazon label. He picked it up, carried it to the door, set it down on the mat, knocked twice out of habit, even though nobody had to sign. He walked back to the van. He stood at the driver's side door with his hand on the handle and looked up at the sky. Clear, blue, perfect flying weather. He got back in the van and pulled away. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him, a text from Marcus. He glanced at it, at a red light. It said, "They're already boarding." Early, Blake moved the departure up by 40 minutes. Something's wrong with the atmospheric certification window, and they pushed through it anyway. Daniel read it twice. Then he set the phone down. He made himself breathe. He kept driving. He had 41 packages left. He had a job he couldn't afford to lose. He had Emma's asthma medication that cost $400 a month and a landlord who was already one conversation away from a difficult conversation about November. He had a daughter who had drawn a smiley face on his sandwich this morning because she knew he needed it. He kept driving. At stop number 7, a woman with a baby on her hip opened the door and smiled at him and said, "Thank you." He smiled back. He walked back to the van. He picked up his phone and read Marcus's text again. Then he opened his email. The journalist he'd written to at 11:47 the night before had not replied. No read receipt, nothing. He put the phone face down on the seat. He told himself there was nothing more he could do. He'd filed with the FAA twice, the NTSB, 2 safety organizations. He'd written a journalist. He'd done everything a private citizen with no legal standing and no institutional power could do. He was a delivery driver now. He was not Sophia Whitmore's problem, and she was not his. He had done what was right, and the system had not listened, and that was not his fault. He believed about 60% of that. The other 40% was still sitting at the kitchen table at 11:47 p.m., hitting send on an email to a stranger. He made his next 3 stops on autopilot. His hands did the work. His mind was 40,000 feet in the air, running calculations that kept coming out, the same way they always had. Stop 10, stop 11, stop 12, his phone buzzed again. He pulled to the curb and picked it up without thinking, expecting another text from Marcus. It was from a number he didn't recognize, Georgia area code. The message read, "Mr. Carter, I'm Claire Hayden. I cover aviation safety for National Air Review. I got your email this morning. I'd like to talk. Can you call me now?" He stared at the text. For exactly 4 seconds he sat completely still. Then he called the number. She picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Carter, Miss Hayden, I read your email last night. Then I read it again this morning. Then I called 2 people I trust in the FAA and asked them about the XW9 complaint from March." She paused. "They confirmed they received it. I asked them what action was taken. They told me the complaint had been reviewed and found insufficient for an inquiry." Another pause, shorter. "I then asked them to tell me who reviewed it, and Daniel said, 'The reviewing officer is on record as having attended a Whitmore Aviation Industry reception in February, 6 weeks before your complaint landed on his desk.'" Daniel said nothing. He was gripping the phone so hard he could feel his pulse in his fingertips. "Your simulation data is solid," Claire Hayden said. Her voice was calm and even, the kind of calm that meant she was working, that she had shifted into a gear that was all forward motion. "I'm not an engineer, but I had someone look at the methodology this morning," he said, and I'm quoting him directly, "that the cascade failure sequence you described is not only plausible, but represents a textbook example of what the industry calls a masked fault, a flaw that performs normally under standard test conditions but fails under the specific combination of altitude, speed, and sustained load." He said, "It's exactly the kind of thing that gets missed in shortened certification cycles." "Shortened," Daniel repeated. The XW9 went through a 43-day certification process. The industry standard for a new airframe of that class is a minimum of 90 days. The number hit him like a door. He'd known the timeline was compressed. He hadn't known the specifics. 43 days, barely half the standard. "Ms. Hayden," he said, "the plane takes off this morning." He looked at the dashboard clock. In approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. A pause. Longer this time. "I know," she said. "I've been on the phone with the FAA regional office since 7 this morning. They are telling me there is no basis for a grounding order based on existing filed complaints." Her voice stayed level, but he could hear something underneath it, the same thing he'd been carrying for 3 months. The specific weight of knowing something terrible and being unable to make anyone else believe it. "I'm filing a full inquiry request this morning. I'm also going to run the story whether they respond or not." "But Mr. Carter, it won't stop the flight," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It won't stop the flight." He sat in the van on the side of the road. A car passed him going too fast. A dog barked somewhere. Normal world, completely normal world, carrying on, unaware. "If something happens," Daniel said. His voice was steady. He'd made it steady on purpose. "Make sure people know the reports existed. Make sure they know when they were filed." "I will," Claire Hayden said. And the way she said it, he believed her. He hung up. He sat there another minute. Then he picked up his route sheet, checked stop 13, and pulled back out into traffic. Because he still had packages to deliver. Because Emma still had medication to pay for. Because the world kept going whether you wanted it to or not, and a man who stopped moving was a man who started drowning. He drove. At 9:48 a.m., 3 miles from stop 18, he pulled over on his own and opened Google News on his phone. He told himself he wasn't going to do this. He searched Whitmore Aviation, XW9 departure anyway. 3 results. A trade publication posting the official press release. Whitmore Aviation's XW9 departs Atlanta for Frankfurt in historic transatlantic debut. A Business Wire item about the contract value. A lifestyle piece about Sophia Whitmore's suit. He closed his browser. He told himself this was out of his hands. He made stop 18. He made stop 19. He made stop 20 and 21, running now because he was behind on his time, moving fast, lifting and carrying and scanning barcodes, the mechanical rhythm of a body doing work, while the mind goes somewhere it can't follow. At stop 22, the homeowner wasn't there, and he had to leave a notice. He knelt on the front step to fill it out, pen moving fast, and then he stood up and turned around and looked south. The sky was still blue, still clear. He thought, for one irrational moment, maybe I was wrong. 15 simulations, but simulations aren't real. Engineers are wrong sometimes. Maybe the 3rd independent review found something I missed. Maybe the 43-day certification was sufficient. Maybe the masked fault was actually within acceptable parameters, and I just couldn't say at that because I was too close to it, because I was the one who found it, and that made me too certain it was catastrophic. Maybe I lost everything for a mistake. That thought was almost worse than the other one. He walked back to the van. He had made it to stop 26 when he heard it. Not on the radio. The radio had been playing a commercial for a mattress company for the past 10 minutes. He heard it through the open van window, a sound he recognized before he understood he was recognizing it. A shift in the air, a change in pressure, the specific way sound travels when something very large and very fast loses its equilibrium. He knew that sound from engineering bays, from testing facilities, from 40 years of being near aircraft. He stopped the van. He looked up, to the south, maybe 2 miles away, maybe less. A black column of smoke was beginning to climb into the perfect blue sky. It was not dramatic at first. It was just smoke. Just a thin, dark thread pulling up from the horizon, the way smoke does before it becomes something you can't look away from. Daniel's hands left the steering wheel, without him deciding to move them. His door was open. He was standing on the road. He didn't remember getting out. The smoke was thickening now. Black going to gray, going to black again, the color of burning fuel and burning metal, and Daniel Carter, who had spent 11 years of his life understanding exactly what that combination meant, felt the bottom drop completely out of his stomach. He knew which plane that was. He already knew. His phone started ringing. Marcus. He picked it up. Danny. Marcus's voice was a frequency Daniel had never heard from him before. Flat and high at the same time, the voice a person makes when the worst thing has already happened. Danny, the XW9 went down, 2 miles from the airport. They're saying it went down on approach. It didn't go down on approach, Daniel said. His own voice sounded strange to him, hollow, like it was coming from a room he wasn't in. It went down because of the fuel system. It went down because of the pressure cascade. It went down because he stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. Not because he didn't know the words. He knew every single word. He could recite the exact technical sequence from memory, in his sleep, backwards. He stopped because saying it out loud, right now, standing on the side of a road with smoke filling up the southern sky, made it real in a way that 11 years of trying to prevent it had never done. "I'm on my way," he said. "Danny, you should stay." He hung up. He got back in the van. He didn't think about the remaining 17 packages. He didn't think about the route, the job, the $9 an hour, the asthma medication, any of it. He looked at the smoke, and he started driving toward it. The access road to the crash site was already chaos by the time he got there. Fire trucks, police cruisers with their lights going, ambulances staged in a line, people parked on the shoulder, standing on the roofs of their cars, watching. The specific awful magnetism of a disaster in progress. Daniel pulled the van onto the shoulder, 400 feet from the perimeter line. He got out. He could feel the heat from where he was standing, which meant it was worse up ahead. He could smell the fuel, the specific chemical and carbon smell of burning aviation-grade kerosene that he'd been around 100 times in hangars and never wanted to smell like this. He started walking toward the perimeter. A police officer held up his hand. "Sir, you need to stay back. I'm an aerospace engineer," Daniel said. "I know that aircraft. Sir, I designed the emergency egress systems on that airframe." Daniel said it clearly. Not loudly, just clearly.
"The way you state a fact that doesn't require debate."
The primary emergency door on the XW9 has a locking mechanism that requires a specific sequence to override in a fire scenario. Your people don't know it. I do. The officer looked at him. Looked at the van. Looked at the Amazon logo on Daniel's jacket, because he still had his delivery vest on. "Sir, I need you to step back. People are dying," Daniel said. The officer's radio cracked. He turned half away to answer it. And Daniel walked around him. He heard the officer shout. He didn't stop. He heard the heat before he felt it, a wall of it, pushing back against him the way heat does when the source is large enough to have its own weather. He pulled his delivery vest up over his nose and mouth and kept moving. Other responders were moving around him, toward and away the controlled chaos of emergency professionals who know their jobs and are doing them fast. Nobody stopped him. Everybody was focused on the fire. The wreckage was 200 feet from the runway perimeter. The XW9 had come down hard and skidded, the fuselage intact in the rear section, the forward cabin crushed and burning. Daniel could see this as he got closer, reading the crash site the way he'd been trained, to read structural failures, looking for the physics, the forces, the sequence. The rear emergency door was on the left side of the fuselage, approximately 40 feet from the point of maximum fire. Still approachable, not safely, but approachable. He got there. The handle was hot enough to take skin. He grabbed it anyway. The locking mechanism had seized. The way it did in high-heat scenarios, he'd flagged this specific failure mode in a systems review 4 years ago, and been told the probability was too low to warrant a redesign. He knew exactly what it had taken to force the door in that condition. He'd run the numbers on it himself. He grabbed the handle with both hands, and he applied pressure in the specific direction that the mechanism's geometry required, not straight pull but angled, 30 degrees upward and lateral, and he felt the thing resist, and then give. A sudden violent release, and the door swung open, and the smoke hit him like a wall. He went in. It was dark inside, and it was loud. Metal contracting in heat makes a sound like something alive. He could hear voices, someone moaning, someone saying, "No, no, no, no," in a continuous loop, someone crying. He moved toward the crying, because crying meant conscious. Crying meant someone who could move if helped. The smoke was at the level of his chest. He dropped lower, moving through the aisle. Seats had torn loose. The overhead panels had come down. He moved through it, using his hands, using his knowledge of the aircraft's interior layout. Because he'd studied those layouts the way he'd studied everything completely, obsessively, because that was how he was built. He found the child first. She was 8 years old. He would find out later her name was Lily Chen, and that her mother was a contract attorney who had been on the flight for the signing ceremony. Lily had been in seat 14F with her mother when the aircraft went down. Her mother had been thrown forward. Lily was still in her seat, belted in, conscious, with a gash on her forehead and the pure animal terror of a child who does not understand what is happening, but knows it is the worst thing that has ever happened. She looked at Daniel when he crouched in front of her, and she didn't say anything. She just looked at him. "Hey," he said. "Hey, look at me. Right here, look at my face." He put both hands on her shoulders, gently. "My name is Daniel. I'm going to get you out. Can you tell me if anything hurts?" "My arm," she whispered. "Okay, which one?" "This one." She moved her left arm slightly and flinched. "Okay, I'm going to carry you. I need you to hold on with your right arm and keep your left one still." "Can you do that?" She nodded. He unbelted her. He lifted her. She held on with her right arm, her face pressed against his shoulder, and she was shaking so hard he could feel it through his own chest. He told her she was doing great. He told her he had a daughter, too. He told her her mom was going to be okay, and he didn't know if that was true, and he said it anyway because sometimes the most important thing you can do for a child is give them something to hold on to. He carried her out through the emergency door. A paramedic met him at the threshold and took the girl from his arms. Daniel stood in the open air for approximately 4 seconds, coughing, pulling clean air into his lungs. Then he heard a voice from inside, a woman's voice. Low, controlled, even through the pain and the smoke, trying to stay controlled, because control was all it had left. "Help, someone, please." Daniel knew that voice. He had heard it say, "An engineer should understand his role." He had heard it say, "Your role is over." He had been hearing it for 3 months in the back of his mind, in the way that certain sentences attach themselves to you, whether you want them to or not. He went back in. The smoke was worse this time. He could feel his vision starting to gray at the edges. Carbon monoxide, the invisible danger, the one that kills you gently. He got low, lower than before. He moved toward the voice. He found Sophia Whitmore in the forward cabin section, on the floor, partially pinned by a section of overhead storage unit that had collapsed. She was conscious. Her suit jacket was torn. There was blood on the left side of her face from a cut above her eye. She was holding herself very still in the specific way of a person who is injured and knows it, and is doing the calculation about how bad. She looked up when Daniel reached her. He watched her face in the moment she recognized him. He watched it because he was human and he couldn't help it, and he would think about that expression for a long time afterward. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was something more raw than either of those things. It was the expression of a person whose entire model of the world has just been broken by a single piece of information. The man she'd fired was in the burning aircraft. He was crouching next to her. He was alive, and she was pinned, and those two facts together made no sense in any version of the world she had built. "You," she said, one word. "Yeah," Daniel said. He was already assessing the situation, hands moving over the collapsed panel, checking its weight distribution, the angle of the pin, what he needed to move, and in what order. "Can you feel your legs?" "Yes." A pause. "Why are you here?" "I'll explain later." He found the leverage point on the panel. It was heavy. He was going to need everything. "I need you to pull your left leg toward you when I lift this." "Not before. When I say go, you don't." She stopped. "Try it again. You don't have to do this." He looked at her. Just for a second. The smoke was making his eyes water, and there was sweat running into them, and everything was hot and loud and wrong, and he looked at Sophia Whitmore and he said, "I know I don't have to." He braced. He put everything he had into the lift: his legs, his back, his arms, the specific kind of full-body effort that leaves marks on you for days. He got it high enough. "Go," he said. She pulled her leg free. He let the panel drop. He grabbed her arm. He got her up. She put weight on both legs, and they held, and he moved, pulling her toward the emergency door. And she moved with him, and the smoke was dense now, almost solid. And his lungs were burning with a kind of burning that was different from effort, and he did not stop. They came out of the door together. Paramedics were there. They took Sophia. Someone grabbed Daniel's arm, and he let himself be moved. Let them guide him away from the heat, and then his legs decided they were done, and he sat down on the ground because the ground was the only option. He sat there and he breathed. 30 feet away, Sophia Whitmore was on a stretcher. Her eyes were open. She was looking at the sky. Then she turned her head and found Daniel sitting on the ground with his delivery vest covered in soot and his hands raw and red, and she looked at him with an expression he had no word for. He looked back. Then a paramedic was in front of him, asking him questions, checking his hands, shining a light in his eyes, and he answered everything automatically, his eyes still going to Emma's face in his mind. His mind already doing the thing it did when an emergency was over, and the adrenaline left, and all that remained was the recognition of what had almost just happened. Behind them, the rear section of the XW9 burned. 43 days of certification. $6 billion, a career destroyed for a report nobody read. Daniel sat on the ground, and he breathed, and he did not look at the fire. Somewhere across the city, Emma Carter was in a fourth-grade classrooms, with her 747 model on her desk, doing long division, not yet knowing that her father had just walked into a burning plane for the second time in 10 minutes. And somewhere in that classroom, the teacher's phone was going to start ringing very soon. And the world that had been moving in one direction for 3 months was about to break wide open and start moving in a completely different one. Because the cameras were everywhere, and someone had been filming from the moment Daniel Carter walked past the police line. And in 22 minutes, the video was going to hit the internet. And nothing not for Whitmore Aviation, not for Richard Blake, not for Sophia Whitmore, and not for a single father delivery driver named Daniel Carter was ever going to be the same again. The video hit the internet at 11:04 a.m. 22 minutes after Daniel Carter walked out of that burning aircraft with Sophia Whitmore's arm over his shoulder. A 17-year-old kid named Jordan Reese, who had been filming from the roof of his mother's car, posted 47 seconds of footage to his social media account with the caption, "Dude just ran into a burning plane twice and saved people." This is insane, Atlanta area. By noon, it had 400,000 views. By 2 o'clock, it had crossed 2 million. By the time the evening news cycle started on the East Coast, every major network had the clip. Every anchor had a version of the same line. A Good Samaritan. A delivery driver. A man who ran toward a burning aircraft when everyone else ran away. None of them knew his name yet. That part came later. And when it did, it changed everything. Daniel didn't know any of this was happening. He was in the back of an ambulance at 11:04 a.m., sitting on the bench with an oxygen mask over his face, while a paramedic named Darius worked on his hands. The burns were 2nd degree on the right palm, 1st degree on the left. Darius was calm and professional, and talked constantly in the way that good emergency workers do, filling the silence so the patient's mind doesn't go somewhere bad. "You're going to feel this tomorrow, more than you feel it right now," Darius said. "The adrenaline's still in your system. Tomorrow morning, your hands are going to tell you a whole story." "I have a delivery route tomorrow," Daniel said. Darius looked at him over the bandage he was wrapping. "Sir, you are not delivering anything tomorrow." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. His phone had been ringing continuously for the past 15 minutes. He could feel it vibrating in his pocket, through the ambulance bench. He hadn't looked at it. He needed 1 minute, just one, where the world wasn't coming at him faster than he could process it. He thought about Sophia. He'd watched them load her into a separate ambulance. She'd been conscious, talking to the paramedics, her voice steady in the way that people who are trained to be in command stay steady even when everything is collapsing. He'd seen her look back once, toward the wreckage. Not at him, at the aircraft, at the things she'd built and the decision she'd made, and the outcome that had been waiting for her since March. He thought about the girl. Lily, the 8-year-old with the left arm injury, who had held on with her right arm and not made a sound the whole way out. He hoped her mother had made it. He didn't know yet. He was afraid to find out. He took the oxygen mask off. "Leave that on a few more minutes," Darius said. "I need to call my daughter," Daniel said. Darius looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. 2 minutes, Daniel pulled out his phone. The screen was a wall of notifications. Missed calls from Marcus, from a number he didn't recognize, from 3 different numbers he definitely didn't recognize. Text messages piling up. He scrolled past all of it and found Emma's school in his contacts and dialed. The receptionist answered on the second ring. "Greenfield Elementary, this is Paula." "Paula, this is Daniel Carter, Emma Carter's father. I need you to tell her I'm okay. I need you to tell her right now, before she sees anything on." He stopped. Recalibrated. "Can you just check on her and tell her dad called and he's fine?" A brief pause. "Mr. Carter, I'm okay, I promise. I just need her to hear that before the news does it first." Another pause. He heard Paula stand up, heard a door, heard the background noise of an elementary school in the middle of the morning. 30 seconds of holding. Then Emma's voice came on the line, small and careful the way it always got when she was worried but trying not to show it. "Dad, hey Bug, I'm okay. What happened?" she said. Mrs. Kowalski turned the TV on for a second, and then turned it off really fast and sent everyone back to their seats and wouldn't say why. Daniel pressed his free hand against his knee, his bandaged hand. He barely felt the pressure. "There was an accident near where I was working. I helped some people. I'm fine. I'm in an ambulance, but I'm fine." "An ambulance?" Her voice went very quiet. "Dad, I'm okay. I promise you, I will pick you up at 3:15, and I will be there, and I'm okay." Silence. Then was it the plane? The question stopped him cold. "Emma, was it the Whitmore plane? The one you said was going to crash?" He closed his eyes. 9 years old. 9 years old, and she'd been paying attention to every single thing for 3 months. And he hadn't even noticed. "Yeah," he said, "it was." She made a sound that wasn't quite crying. It was something adjacent to crying, the sound of a child who is holding herself together through sheer force of a will she inherited from someone. "And you went in," she said. "Not a question, I went in. Because there were people inside." "Yeah." She was quiet again. Long enough that he almost said her name. Then she said, very quietly, very precisely, the way she said things when they mattered, "I'm glad you went in, Dad. I know it was scary, but I'm glad." He couldn't speak for a moment. "I'll see you at 3:15, he finally managed. "Okay," she said, "and then I love you. I love you too, Bug." "Go back to class." He hung up. He put the phone face down on his knee. He sat in the back of the ambulance with his burned hands and his soot-covered delivery vest, and the oxygen mask hanging loose around his neck. And he let himself have 30 seconds where he didn't have to be anything, except a father who just heard his daughter say, "I'm glad you went in." Then his phone rang again, unknown number, Atlanta area code. He picked it up. "Mr. Carter." The voice was a man's. Clipped, official, the voice of someone who introduces himself by title. "This is Special Agent Robert Harlan, NTSB. I'm at the crash site. I need to speak with you as soon as possible. Are you available?" Daniel looked at his bandaged hands. "I'm in an ambulance." "I know. Which hospital are they taking you to?" "I don't know yet." "I'll find you," Harlan said and hung up. Daniel stared at his phone. The NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. The people who showed up after. The people who figured out why. He thought about his simulation files, his emails. The FAA complaint with the timestamp of March 14th. Follow-up. The journalist, the chain of documentation he'd been building for 3 months without knowing if it would ever matter. It was going to matter now. He looked up at Darius. "Where are we going?" "Grady Memorial," Darius said. "Okay," Daniel said. He put the oxygen mask back over his face without being asked. He had a feeling he was going to need to be at full capacity for what was coming. At 12:47 p.m., while Daniel was being processed through Grady Memorial's emergency department, Marcus Webb was doing something that would change the course of the next 6 months of everyone's lives. He was sitting in his car in the Whitmore Aviation employee parking lot, which had been sealed by federal investigators 40 minutes ago, and he was going through his personal email on his phone, forwarding every internal document he'd quietly, carefully, systematically saved over the past 3 months to a secure drop address Claire Hayden had given him 2 weeks ago when Daniel had first connected them. He forwarded 41 documents, engineering review logs, internal pressure test results. The October report, the third independent review that Daniel had been excluded from, which turned out to contain, buried in an appendix on page 47, a notation about anomalous fuel transfer readings at simulated altitude that had been classified as within acceptable variance and signed off on by Richard Blake personally. Marcus's hands were steady. He'd been preparing for this moment for 11 weeks. He'd been watching and waiting and carefully not doing anything that would get him fired before he had enough to matter. He sent the last email. He sat in the parking lot. Then he called Daniel. Daniel picked up on the third ring. He was sitting in an ER bay with a curtain drawn around him, and his hands freshly bandaged, and a doctor who was trying to tell him he needed to rest. "Tell me you're okay," Marcus said. "I'm okay, your hands. 2nd degree on the right. I'll live." Marcus let out a breath that had clearly been held for a long time. "I sent everything to Claire Hayden, everything I had, including the Blake signature on the October report." Daniel went still. The anomalous reading notation. Page 47, Appendix C, he signed it personally. He knew, Danny. He looked at data showing irregular fuel transfer behavior, and he signed off that it was within acceptable limits. 6 weeks before the rollout, the curtain moved. A nurse came in, glanced at Daniel on the phone, and left again without a word. Daniel waited until her footsteps faded. "Marcus," he said. "Be careful. I've been careful for 11 weeks. Be more careful. When this breaks, it needs to break right," Marcus said. "It needs to have everything, every document, every timestamp, every signature, so that nobody can say it was disgruntled employees making things up." His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who had been sitting on something heavy and was finally setting it down. "They destroyed your career, Danny. They knew the plane wasn't safe and they flew it anyway, and I am not going to let them explain that away." Daniel sat in the ER bay. Through the curtain he could hear the normal sounds of a hospital wheels, voices, the beep of monitors. The completely ordinary soundtrack of a world going on outside, whatever was happening in his specific life. "How's the girl?" he finally asked, the 8-year-old. "Do you know anything?" "Lily Chen, broken arm, mild concussion." "She's okay." A pause. "Her mother is in surgery. They're saying she's going to make it." Daniel breathed out. "Good," he said. "It came out rough." "That's good. There were 9 people on that plane. 7 survived. 2 didn't make it, both in the forward cabin." Marcus stopped. "I'm sorry. 2 people." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about the forward cabin the way it had looked when he went in the second time, the degree of structural collapse, the fire concentration. He'd done the triage in his mind without meaning to. He'd known when he saw it that the forward cabin was the worst of it. He'd known, and he'd gone in anyway, because Sophia was in there, and he is who he is. "Okay," he said. "The investigation is going to be fast," Marcus said. "Harlan's team, I've seen them work before. They're good, and they move fast when the wreckage is fresh. Danny, they're going to find the fault in the fuel system within 48 hours. And when they do, they're going to look at the complaint history," Daniel said. "And they're going to find yours, filed March 14th. Right, 3 months ago." Daniel didn't say anything. He just sat with that, with the weight of 3 months, with every unanswered email, and every automated response, and every morning he'd gotten up and driven a delivery route, while carrying the specific terrible knowledge of what was coming and being unable to make anyone listen. With the two people in the forward cabin who hadn't made it out. He sat with that for a long time. Special Agent Harlan arrived at Grady Memorial at 1:23 p.m. He was younger than his voice, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, the kind of precise energy that comes from a career spent reconstructing disasters. He had a colleague with him, a woman named Agent Torres, who carried a recorder and a laptop, and who typed faster than Daniel had ever seen anyone type. They pulled chairs up to Daniel's ER bay. Harlan looked at Daniel's bandaged hands. He looked at the soot still visible along his hairline that the nurses hadn't fully cleaned. He looked at the Amazon delivery vest hung over the back of the chair. "You worked for Whitmore Aviation," Harlan said, "for 11 years. Until March 17th. You were terminated, yes, and before your termination you filed an internal safety report regarding the XW9 fuel management system. 11 internal reports," Daniel said, "over 8 months, escalating in specificity and urgency." Torres looked up from her laptop. Harlan's expression didn't change. But something, in his stillness, shifted the way a person goes very quiet when they hear something they need to hear again to make sure they heard it right. 11, Harlan said. "I can send you all of them. I kept copies of everything. You kept copies." Harlan looked at Torres. Torres looked at Harlan. Something else passed between them, a communication that required no words, the specific kind that develops between people who have worked together long enough to think in parallel. "Mr. Carter," Harlan said, "walk me through the fault. In your own words. Start from when you first identified it." Daniel talked for 40 minutes. He started at the beginning, the routine systems check in July of last year that had first surfaced the anomalous pressure reading. The way he'd initially written it off as a census issue, and then run it again and gotten the same number. The decision to build a simulation, the first result. The second, the 15th, the way the cascade failure emerged, not as a dramatic single event, but as a slow, inevitable sequence pressure differential, transfer interruption, backup valve overload. Total system compromise that happened, with the same outcome every single time, under the specific conditions of high altitude and sustained cruise speed. He talked about the internal reports, about the meetings where the data had been presented and dismissed, about being excluded from the October review, about the termination meeting, the 9th-floor office, Sophia's face when she told him his role was over. He talked about the FAA complaint, about the months afterward, about the journalist, about Marcus's texts, about this morning the route, the phone call from Claire Hayden, the smoke on the horizon. Torres was typing the whole time. Harlan asked questions, precise, technical questions that told Daniel he was talking to someone who understood aircraft systems, who had done this before, who knew where the bodies were buried in an investigation, and was already triangulating toward them. When Daniel finished, Harlan sat back in Ant's chair and looked at him for a moment. "You went in," Harlan said. "Not a question, just a statement." A piece of information he was holding up to see how it looked from different angles. "Yes, twice. Yes, into an aircraft that was on fire. Yes, after Sophia Whitmore terminated your employment. Yes." Harlan was quiet. "Then why?" Daniel thought about the child crying. He thought about Emma's voice on the phone. "I'm glad you went in." He thought about Sarah, who had been the kind of person who never needed to be asked twice when someone needed help, and who had raised a daughter who was already that same person, at 9 years old, and who had spent 7 years making sure he was trying to be that same person too. "Because I heard someone who needed help," he said. "That's all." Harlan studied him for another moment. "That's all," he repeated. "That's all." Harlan closed his notebook. He looked at Torres, who was still typing. He looked back at Daniel. "We're going to need those files. Everything you have. Every internal report, every email, every simulation file. Can you get those to us today? I can get them to you in the next hour." "Good." Harlan stood up. He extended his hand, then seemed to realize both of Daniel's were bandaged and stopped, recalibrated, gave a short nod instead. Mr. Carter. For what it's worth, he stopped. He was a man who chose words carefully and was choosing them carefully now. What you did this morning took a kind of courage I don't see often. Both kinds. Daniel looked at him. Harlan picked up his jacket. We'll be in touch, he left. Torres closed her laptop and followed. Daniel sat alone in the ER bay, his hands throbbed. The adrenaline was gone now, all the way gone, and what it left behind was the specific exhaustion of a body that has been asked to do too much, and has done it anyway. He felt it in his arms, his shoulders, his back. He felt it in a place behind his sternum that had no physical name. He thought about the two people who hadn't made it out of the forward cabin. He thought about that for a long time. At 3:04 p.m., Claire Hayden's story went live on the National Air Review website. The headline was, Whistleblower's Warnings Preceded Fatal XW9 Crash Complaint Filed, months before disaster went unaddressed. By 3:30, it was the most read article on the site by a factor of 10. By 4:00 p.m., every major news organization in the country had called the publication asking for Claire Hayden. By 4:15, the wire services had picked up the core claim and were running it in a 2-paragraph brief that was appearing on every news aggregator in America. By 4:30, the name Daniel Carter was attached to the viral video of the man who had run into the burning plane. And by the time Daniel walked into Greenfield Elementary at 3:14 p.m. 1 minute early, hands bandaged, still smelling faintly of smoke and fuel, the world already knew who he was. He just didn't know it yet. Emma was waiting at the front entrance with her purple backpack and her 747 model. She saw him coming across the parking lot, and she walked fast, then faster. And then she was running, and he went down to one knee because his back was not going to survive a full-speed impact from a 9-year-old, and because he needed to be at her level. She hit him hard, both arms around his neck. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just held on. He put his bandaged hands as gently as he could on her back and held her. I saw the video, she said into his shoulder. Yeah? Like 20 kids showed me on their tablets at lunch. Mr. Hansen made everyone put them away, but I already saw it. She pulled back enough to look at his hands. Her face changed when she saw the bandages. Does it hurt? It'll hurt more tomorrow, apparently. She looked at his face. Checking him the same methodical way he checked aircraft systems. Eyes, face, posture, making sure the numbers added up. You went back in the second time for that lady, she said. The one from the video, she's the CEO. He held her gaze. Yeah, she's the one who fired you. Yeah, bug. Emma processed this with the particular seriousness of a child who does not yet know how to pretend complexity is simple. She chewed her lip. She looked at his hands again. Then she looked at him. Are you mad at her? He thought about Sophia's face in the smoke. About the expression that had broken open when she'd recognized him. About one word, you. Not right now, he said honestly. Right now I'm just glad everybody got out. Emma nodded slowly. She seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer. Then she said, Did she say thank you? He almost laughed. Not yet. Emma picked up her backpack. She should, she said firmly, with the absolute moral clarity of a 9-year-old, which is the most reliable moral clarity in the world. He took her hand and they walked to the van. He didn't look at his phone until they were buckled in. When he did, there were 64 missed you calls. He put the phone face down on the seat, next to the peanut butter sandwich Emma had made him that morning. Still wrapped in the paper towel, still with the smiley face. He'd never had time to eat it. He picked it up and took a bite. Emma watched him from the back seat. Is it still good? She asked. Best sandwich I've ever had, he said. She smiled. It was Sarah's smile. It had always been Sarah's smile. He started the van. They were 2 blocks from home when his phone rang through the Bluetooth. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the area code and answered on speaker. Mr. Carter. A woman's voice, careful, measured with something underneath it he couldn't quite place. Not Harlan, not Torres, not anyone he'd spoken to today. Yes, he said. This is Catherine Whitmore. A pause. Sophia's mother. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. Emma looked up from her backpack where she'd been rearranging something. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "I'm calling from the hospital," Catherine Whitmore said. "Sophia's in recovery. She's going to be fine. They're saying she'll be released tomorrow." Another pause, longer this time, waited. "She's been asking for you since she woke up." The van moved through an intersection. A light turned yellow, and Daniel stopped when he could have made it. "She's been asking for me," he repeated. "Yes. She wanted me to call you herself, but they wouldn't give her a phone yet, and she—" Catherine Whitmore's voice shifted. The careful composure moved, just slightly, like a curtain in a draft. "She was very insistent, Mr. Carter. I don't know what to say to you, except that my daughter is alive because of what you did. And that I am not someone who doesn't know what that means." Emma was completely still in the back seat, not pretending to be busy. Just listening, with the focused, open attention of a child who understands this is important. "I'm glad she's okay," Daniel said, and he meant it. He would examine later, alone, in the quiet of the apartment after Emma was asleep, how complicated the geography of that statement was. How many different things could be true at the same time. But in this moment, in this van, it was simply true. "She wants to see you," Catherine said. "Will you come?" He looked in the rearview mirror. Emma met his eyes. She gave him the smallest nod, like she'd been consulted and had made her recommendation. "When?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," Catherine Whitmore said. "If you're able." He looked at his bandaged hands on the steering wheel. He thought about what Darius had said in the ambulance. "Tomorrow your hands are going to tell you a whole story." "I'll be there," Daniel said. He hung up. He drove the rest of the way home in silence. When he pulled into the lot and cut the engine, Emma was the first to speak. "Dad," she said. "Yeah? I think things are going to be different now." He sat with that for a second. Different. Such a small word for the size of what was moving toward them. He could feel it the way you feel weather, before it arrives a pressure change, something fundamental shifting in the atmosphere. The investigation, the documents Marcus had sent, Claire Hayden's article, 64 missed calls, Sophia Whitmore asking for him from a hospital recovery room. Something enormous was in motion. Something that had started with a safety report in July of last year and had been building through every unanswered email and every delivered package and every 15 simulations that ended the same way. And today it had broken the surface, and now it was going to move the way. Water moves when a dam gives fast, and in all directions, and you couldn't control it. You could only be ready. "Yeah," he said, "I think so too." Emma unclipped her seatbelt. She grabbed her backpack and her 747 model. She opened the door and climbed out and looked back at him through the window. "Are you scared?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. The way she deserved. "A little," he said. "Are you?" She considered this with complete seriousness. "No," she said finally. "Because you already did the hardest part." She turned and walked toward the apartment. Daniel sat in the van alone. His hands throbbed. The smiley face sandwich wrapper sat on the passenger seat. The phone had 47 more notifications he hadn't looked at yet. He thought about Richard Blake, who had signed a document on page 47 of an appendix and told himself it was within acceptable variance. He thought about the 2 seats in the forward cabin. He thought about tomorrow morning, the hospital, Sophia's face in the smoke. And then he reached over and picked up the phone, and he started going through it. One notification at a time. Because the world was moving now, fast and in all directions, and Daniel Carter had never in his life been the kind of man who sat still while something needed doing. He had a daughter to protect, a truth to make sure stayed told, and a hospital visit in the morning. That was enough to start with. That was more than enough. He didn't sleep, not really. He got Emma to bed by 8:30, read her 2 chapters of their book, turned the light off, and then sat at the kitchen table until past midnight going through 64 missed calls and answering the ones that mattered. Claire Hayden. Special Agent Harlan's office requesting the simulation files be uploaded to a secure NTSB portal by 9 a.m. Two aviation safety attorneys who had seen the news and were offering representation, unprompted, pro bono. A producer from a national morning show. Three journalists he'd never heard of and one he had. He answered Harlan's office first. He uploaded every file. He had all 11 internal reports, the simulation methodology, the 15 result sets, the FAA complaint with its timestamp, the follow-up, the chain of emails that show exactly when he had said what and to whom, and what the response had been, which in most cases was silence. He answered Claire Hayden second. She had 17 follow-up questions, and she asked them in rapid succession, the way she worked, and he answered everyone with the same technical precision he'd used with Harlan. Before they hung up, she said, "Daniel, I want you to know something. The reason this story landed the way it did, the reason people are reading it, it's not the crash. It's not even the video. It's the dates. People see March 14th on that FAA complaint, and then they see June 14th on the crash report, and they do the math themselves. That 3-month gap is doing something to people." "What is it doing?" he asked. "It's making them feel what you've been feeling since March," she said. "That's the hardest thing to manufacture in journalism, and you handed it to me with documentation." He didn't answer the morning show producer. He didn't answer the journalists he didn't recognize. He sat at the kitchen table with the files open on his laptop and his bandaged hands, making everything slower and more painful than it should have been. And he thought about what Harlan had said. Both kinds of courage. He was still thinking about it at 2 a.m. when he finally closed the laptop and went to lie down. He didn't close his eyes for a long time. He lay in the dark and listened to the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, a car passing on the street below, Emma breathing steadily in the next room, and he thought about the two people in the forward cabin. He thought about them with the specific gravity of a man who knows that his warnings, heard differently, might have changed the outcome. He would carry that. He understood that he would carry that for the rest of his life, alongside everything else he carried, alongside Sarah and the years after, and the $9 an hour and the 15 simulations. That was the weight of knowing. You didn't get to put it down just because you'd tried. He was up at 5:30. He made coffee. He made Emma's lunch. He wrote her a note for the kitchen table, because she was still asleep, and he needed to leave early, just 3 words. And a drawing of a terrible airplane that she would recognize, because he always drew terrible. Airplanes in his notes to her, and she always saved them. He left the note. He drove to Grady Memorial. It was 7:12 a.m. when he walked through the hospital entrance. His hands were wrapped. His jacket was the navy one he'd worn the day he was fired, because it was the only good jacket he owned, and it had been cleaned since, and he had not had enough sleep. He told the desk he was there to see Sophia Whitmore. The receptionist checked something on her screen, made a call, and told him to wait. He waited 4 minutes before Catherine Whitmore appeared in the lobby. She was 63 years old, and she looked like the photograph Daniel had once seen in a Whitmore Aviation Annual Report from 15 years ago, which meant she had aged in the way that certain people do not diminished but consolidated. Everything unnecessary burned away. What remained essential? She was dressed simply, no jewelry except a watch. She looked at Daniel the way a person looks at someone they've been trying to imagine and are now measuring against the image. She extended her hand. He shook it with his left, the less damaged one. She looked at the bandage and didn't comment on it, which he respected. "Thank you for coming," she said. "How is she?" he asked. Sore. Impatient. A small, brief expression crossed Catherine's face, something between affection and exasperation, the specific combination that belongs exclusively to mothers. "She's been awake since 4. They keep telling her to rest, and she keeps telling them she'll rest when she's addressed certain matters." She paused. "She means you. She means this." She led him down a corridor and into an elevator, and down another corridor, and Daniel followed, noticing the way the hospital morning moved around them. Nurses changing shifts, a cart of medication going past, a man in a waiting area with his head in his hands doing the specific math of bad news. Catherine stopped at a door. She turned to him before opening it. Mr. Carter. I want to say something to you before you go in. Okay, he said. My daughter is not good at this, Catherine said. At being wrong. At saying so. She was raised by a father who treated admission of error as weakness, and it took her 30 years to even partially unlearn that. She held his gaze directly. She is trying to unlearn more of it right now. I think seeing you is part of how she does that. I would ask you to. She stopped herself. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You've earned the right to walk into that room however you need to. I just want you to know she is trying. Daniel looked at the door. He thought about the 9th floor. He thought about the termination agreement on the table, already notarized. He thought about Emma asking, "Are you mad at her?" and himself answering, "Not right now." He looked at Catherine Whitmore. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. She opened the door. Sophia was sitting up in the hospital bed. That was the first thing. She was sitting up, not lying down, because lying down was apparently not something she was willing to do in front of anyone, even now. She had a bandage above her left eye, and bruising along her jaw, and her left arm in a soft brace, and she was wearing a hospital gown that she was clearly furious about on a cellular level. And when Daniel walked in, she looked at him, with an expression that had been worked on. He could tell. She'd been preparing for this since 4 a.m., and what she'd prepared was an expression that was not asking for anything, that was not displaying anything. It didn't mean to display. It didn't fully hold. He watched it shift when she saw his hands. "Sit down," she said. Her voice was steady, rough from the smoke but steady. He sat in the chair beside the bed. Catherine quietly left, pulling the door almost closed behind her. They looked at each other. In the hallway outside, someone was paging a doctor. The hospital morning continued indifferent. "I watched the video," Sophia said. "Someone brought me a phone this morning, against medical advice. I watched it 4 times. He didn't say anything." "You went past the police line," she said. "Yes, you went in twice." "Yes." She looked at his hands again. When she looked back up, the expression she'd been holding together was doing something different at the edges. "Why didn't you?" She stopped it. "You had every reason not to." "I know," he said. "I destroyed your career." She said it plainly. No cushioning. He had the impression she'd decided that plainness was the only thing she had left that was worth anything. "I sat in that conference room, and I listened to you tell me that plane was going to fail. And I chose the contract over the evidence. I chose the timeline over the people who might be in that aircraft." Her jaw tightened. "I told myself you were wrong. I told myself Blake's team had looked at it and found it acceptable. I told myself you were a disgruntled employee with a grudge, and not a man who was trying to prevent a disaster." She paused. "I told myself that because it was easier than the alternative. And because I was afraid of what it would cost us." The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily. Daniel sat still. "How many people were on the plane?" he asked, because he needed to hear her say it. 9, she said, and the word cost her something. He could see it cost her. 7 survived. She held his gaze. 2 didn't. "I know," he said. "Margaret Osei," Sophia said. 44. Head of international contracts. She'd worked for us for 12 years. And Paul Reyes, 28. He was on his first international trip with the company. He'd only been with us for 7 months. She stopped. Her voice had not broken, but it had changed. Something load-bearing had shifted in it. "I knew both of them. Margaret had a son in college. Paul was saving up to propose to his girlfriend." Daniel sat with that. He did not look away from her. He understood why she needed to say their names. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it, in the complicated way that you can mean something while also knowing it is not sufficient and will never be sufficient, and that's part of what you have to live with. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "You're sorry," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I fired you. I ignored your warnings. 2 people are dead because I chose profit over a safety report. And you're sitting in that chair telling me you're sorry." "I'm sorry they're gone," he said. "That's what I'm sorry for." She turned her face away. She looked at the wall for a moment. He could see the muscles in her jaw working. When she turned back, her eyes were wet. She didn't try to hide it, and she didn't let it fall, and those two things, together, the visibility of the emotion and the refusal to perform it, told him something about who she was, underneath the CEO, underneath the ninth floor, underneath 31 years of an industry that had told her that control was the only currency that mattered. "I was wrong," she said, "about the plane, about you. About all of it." She said it simply, the way she'd said the names. Without cushioning. "I don't know if there's anything I can say that means anything after what happened. I'm not going to insult you by pretending there is." She paused. "But I needed you to hear me say it, directly. Not through lawyers or press releases. I needed to say it to your face." The room was very quiet. Daniel looked at her. He thought about March. He thought about the cardboard box. He thought about $9 an hour, and Emma's asthma medication, and the 15 simulations. He thought about Emma's note this morning. The 3 words she'd written back on the note in her careful 4th grade handwriting. He thought about what it had taken to walk on to this room. And he thought about what it had taken for her to ask him to. "I hear you," he said. She exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that has been held for a very long time. "What happens now?" she asked. "Harlan's team finds the fault," Daniel said. "Which they will. 48 hours, maybe less. Then they look at the complaint history. They find March 14th. They look at what action was taken." He paused. "Then they look at who signed off on the October review." Something in Sophia's expression sharpened. "Blake. Page 47 of the appendix," Daniel said. "Anomalous fuel transfer readings at simulated altitude. Classified as within acceptable variance." His signature. "A beat. Then you have that. It was sent to the NTSB this morning. Along with 40 other internal documents." Sophia absorbed this. He could see her processing it, not just the legal implications, but the fuller picture of what had been happening around her, while she'd been running toward a $6 billion contract. Richard Blake, her VP, a man she'd trusted, a man who had sat in the same room when she fired Daniel Carter, and had said you created a liability without mentioning that he'd personally reviewed data, suggesting the liability was real. "He knew," she said. "He signed the document that said it was acceptable," Daniel said carefully. "What he knew is going to be a question for Harlan's team, and probably a grand jury." Sophia's face was absolutely still. "He sat in that room," she said slowly. "He let me fire you. He let me call you a disgruntled employee while he had that document in his files." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her voice went very quiet. "He used me. He needed someone to make the call," Daniel said. "You made the call. He signed the page. Both of those things are true." She looked at him with an expression he had no previous category for. It was past guilt, past anger. It was the expression of a person in the specific moment they understand, how they were positioned, what role they played in something larger and worse than they knew, and how that positioning will now follow them, regardless of their intentions. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Tell the truth," he said. "Same as I've been doing since July." She nodded slowly. "Then I'm going to have to make a statement. Public. Full disclosure." She said it the way a person says something they've decided, before they were fully ready to decide it. But no, it's the only right thing. About the complaint history. About my decision to proceed. About what I knew and what I should have known. She paused. "The board is going to push back. My legal team is going to tell me to say as little as possible. I'm going to do it anyway." He looked at her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Yeah," she said. "I do." And the way she said it, direct, without drama, the voice of someone who has just finished calculating the cost and decided to pay it, he believed her. At 9:47 a.m., while Daniel was driving back from the hospital, Richard Blake was in the Whitmore Aviation Legal Department, on a call with 3 attorneys and saying, with the practiced calm of a man who had survived corporate crises before, that the October review had been conducted in good faith based on available data, and that any reading of the appendix notations as a suppressed safety finding was a fundamental mischaracterization of standard engineering risk language. He was saying this when his assistant knocked on the door. He held up one finger, the universal signal, for 1 minute. His assistant opened the door anyway. She had a specific look on her face. Not the look of routine interruption. The look of something that has already happened and cannot be unhappened. "Sir," she said, "the NTSB is downstairs." Richard Blake stopped talking mid-sentence. "They have a subpoena," she said, "for the October review files. Original documents, including all signatures and the chain of authorization." Blake looked at his 3 attorneys on the screen. They looked at each other. The practiced calm began, very slightly, to show its infrastructure, the places where it was being held up, rather than existing naturally. "I'll call you back," he said to the screen. He hung up. He sat for 11 seconds. 11 seconds in which a great deal of internal calculation happened. The kind that happens when a man realizes the version of events he's been constructing for 3 months has just encountered something it cannot absorb. Then he picked up his personal phone, not his work phone, and dialed a number. He got voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message. He sat for another moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, the expensive one, the one that always fit, and walked out of the legal department, toward the elevator. His assistant watched him go. She had worked for him for 6 years, and she knew his tells, and she watched him walk away. And then she sat down at the desk and she looked up Daniel Carter's name on her computer, and she read Claire Hayden's article from start to finish. When she finished reading it, she sat still for a moment. Then she forwarded it to her personal email, just in case. At 10:23 a.m., Special Agent Harlan's team made their first public statement from the crash site. It was brief and technical and contained exactly one sentence that every news organization immediately excerpted and ran as a standalone headline. Preliminary findings indicate a failure originating in the aircraft's fuel management system, consistent with documented anomalies previously reported to the FAA. Consistent with documented anomalies previously reported to the FAA. 12 words that meant someone told them this was going to happen. The internet understood those 12 words immediately. By 11 a.m., the phrase was trending. By noon, Daniel Carter's name was attached to it in every trending conversation. By 1 p.m., the March 14th FAA complaint had been obtained and published by 3 separate outlets, and people were reading it, actually reading it. The technical language and the simulation and the escalating urgency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at and was trying as hard as he could to make the system hear him. Daniel was in a pharmacy picking up Emma's asthma medication when his phone started ringing without stopping. He stood in line with the orange prescription bag in his bandaged hands and looked at the notifications piling up and felt the world doing what Emma had predicted last night, shifting, tilting, moving in a different direction than it had been going. He paid for the medication. He walked out to the van. He sat behind the wheel. He had a voicemail from Harlan's office requesting an on-record interview for later that afternoon. He had a voicemail from one of the pro bono attorneys saying she needed to speak with him urgently. He had a voicemail from a number he didn't recognize with a Houston area code, and when he played it, it turned out to be a retired FAA inspector named Gerald Moss, who introduced himself carefully and then said, "Mr. Carter, I know the officer who reviewed your March complaint. I've known him for 20 years. When this story broke this morning, I called him. He's not doing well. He knows what he missed. I think you're going to want to hear what he has to say, because it goes farther than your case." Daniel sat with that voicemail for a long moment. Then he called the attorney first, because he had enough of his father's practicality to know that everything that was coming, the interviews, the investigation, the public statements, Sophia was going to say, and whatever Blake's attorneys were going to do, needed to go through someone who understood the legal terrain. The attorney's name was Patricia Okafor. She had 20 years in aviation law, and she answered on the first ring. "Mr. Carter, I've read every document that's been made public, and I've watched the video 4 times. I want to represent you. I'm not going to charge you. I want to do this because it's the right case, and because I have been waiting for the right case for a while." A pause. "Are you currently represented?" "No," he said. "Good. Then I need you to stop talking to journalists and investigators without me present, starting right now. Can you do that? Harlan's office wants an on-record interview this afternoon. I'll call them and reschedule for tomorrow with me in the room. Don't worry about that. He could hear her moving, switching modes, the way she had probably switched modes 1,000 times from listening to acting, the transition of a person who knows what to do and is already doing it. How are your hands? The question surprised him. Second degree on the right, he said. Why? Because workers' compensation, personal injury, and the specific liability question of whether Whitmore Aviation's failure to act on your safety complaints constitutes a proximate cause of your harm is something we're going to need to document carefully. Her voice was crisp but not cold. Also, because I'm a human being, and you ran into a burning aircraft and those kinds of injuries matter. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He thought about Darius in the ambulance, telling him tomorrow, your hands are going to tell you a whole story. They were telling the story now. A low, persistent burning that had been there all morning, and that he'd been ignoring through force of habit. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Patricia said. This is going to get harder before it gets easier. Blake's attorneys are already positioning. I've seen 2 statements in the past hour. They're going to try to make the October review. The center of the story argue it was a legitimate engineering judgment call, not a suppressed finding. They're going to try to separate Blake from the decision to fire you. She paused. They're also going to look for anything they can use against your credibility. There's nothing, he said. There never is, with people like you, she said. That's usually the problem. Juries don't know what to do with someone who just did the right thing without an angle. We're going to make that easy for them to understand. He sat in the pharmacy parking lot and talked to Patricia Okafor for 22 more minutes. By the time he hung up, he had representation, a rescheduled NTSB interview, and a slightly clearer picture of the legal terrain around what had been his life for the past 3 months. He drove home. At 2:15 p.m., Sophia Whitmore held a press conference from her hospital room. She was sitting up. She had declined the option to appear via statement. She had told her PR team that she would take questions, and then she had told them she was going to do this her way, and they should decide how much of that they wanted to be involved in. 2 of them stayed. 1 left. The camera was a single feed from a hospital-approved journalist pool. She looked directly into it. She had the bandage above her eye and the bruising along her jaw, and she made no effort to minimize either. On March 14th of this year, she said, a Whitmore Aviation engineer named Daniel Carter filed a formal safety complaint with the FAA regarding the XW9 fuel management system. That complaint had been preceded by 11 internal reports submitted over 8 months, each one escalating in urgency and specificity. She paused. On March 17th, I terminated Daniel Carter's employment. I characterized his concerns as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. I did this because his concerns were inconvenient to our timeline. I did this because I chose a $6 billion contract over a safety report. And I did this in front of a room full of senior leadership who all watched me do it. The room beyond the camera, she couldn't see it, but she knew it was there, went absolutely silent. 2 people are dead, she said. Margaret Osi, Paul Reyes. I knew them both. They were not abstractions. They were people who came to work for this company and trusted that we were doing our jobs. She stopped. She held the stillness. I was not doing my job. I was protecting a transaction. Those are not the same thing, and I knew the difference, and I made the wrong choice anyway. She took 1 question after that. From a reporter in the pool who asked what she intended to do going forward. I've instructed our legal team to cooperate fully with the NSB investigation, she said. I've also instructed them to preserve every internal document related to the XW9 program, including documents that are not favorable to the company. She paused. As for my personal intentions, I'll have more to say about that when the immediate investigation is complete. What I can tell you now is that I will not allow what happened to Daniel Carter to be treated as a sidebar to this story. He reported this correctly. He reported it in time. And the system failed him. The feed cut. In a conference room 11 floors above the Whitmore Aviation Legal Department, Richard Blake watched the press conference on a laptop and said nothing for a long time. Then he said to his attorneys, "She's burning everything down." His lead attorney, a man named Strauss, who had managed corporate crises for 30 years and had the steadiness that comes from having seen almost everything, looked at him very carefully. "Mr. Blake," he said, "we need to have a specific conversation about what happened between you and the October review team. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Because the time for managing this is ending." Blake looked at Strauss. Strauss held his gaze. "All of it," Strauss said. "Starting from when you first saw the anomalous reading data." The silence in the conference room was a different kind of silence than the one in Sophia's hospital room. Heavier, the silence of a calculation being made that has no good outcomes, only varying degrees of bad. Blake looked at the laptop screen, where Sophia's face was still frozen on the paused feed. He started talking. At 3:14 p.m., Daniel Carter was standing in the pickup line at Greenfield Elementary. Same time as yesterday, same parking lot. His bandaged hands on the steering wheel, the van engine idling, the radio off because he needed it quiet. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Have you seen the press conference?" He texted back, "Not yet." Marcus sent a link. Daniel looked at it. He would watch it later, after Emma was in bed, alone. He needed to process it without having to explain his face to a 9-year-old. Another text from Marcus. She said, "Your name 4 times. She said the system failed you, on camera, in a hospital gown." Daniel sat with that. He wasn't sure yet what he felt about it. He understood it was significant. He understood that what Sophia had done voluntarily, on camera, against every piece of legal advice she was certainly receiving, was not a small thing. He understood it had cost her something real and would cost her more. He also understood that Margaret Osaby's son was in college somewhere and had gotten a phone call yesterday that had ended one version of his life and started another. He understood that Paul Reyes's girlfriend was waiting for a proposal that was not coming. Both of those things were true at the same time. Sophia's press conference and Margaret Osaby's son. He was going to have to hold both of those things for a long time, maybe forever, and he was okay with that. It was honest. It was what the situation was. The school doors opened. Kids started coming out. He watched for the purple backpack. He found it, Emma, moving fast through the crowd, eyes scanning the pickup line the way she always did, and then finding him in her face doing the thing it did, settling, relaxing. The specific relief of a child who has been holding something all day and can finally put it down. She got in the van. She put her backpack on the seat. She put her 747 model in her lap. She buckled her seatbelt. She looked at him. "How were your hands today?" she asked. "They told me a whole story," he said. She seemed to consider this as a satisfactory answer. She looked out the window as he pulled out of the lot. They drove for a block in silence, which was comfortable. The way silence is comfortable between two people who know each other well enough not to need to fill it. Then Emma said, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" He thought about Patricia Okafor. He thought about Harlan's team. He thought about Font 41 documents and a signature on page 47. He thought about Sophia on camera, in a hospital gown, saying his name 4 times. He thought about this moment. This van, this girl, this particular ordinary extraordinary Tuesday afternoon in June, with the sun coming through the windshield and the city moving around them, and everything broken open, and nothing yet decided and everything. Somehow, pointing toward something, other than what it had been pointing toward yesterday. "Yeah," he said, "I think we are." She nodded once. She looked back out the window. She turned the 747 model over once in her hands. "Good," she said, "because I want you to build planes again." He looked at her in the mirror. She was looking at the sky. He looked back at the road. Something that had been good for 3 months opened very quietly in his chest. Not all the way, just enough to let a little air in. Just enough to remind him that it was still there. He drove his daughter home through the June afternoon, through a city that didn't know his name yesterday and knew it today and would know it differently tomorrow. And he thought about planes. Not the ones behind him, the ones ahead, the ones he hadn't built yet. The grand jury indicted Richard Blake on 4 counts 11 days after the crash. Daniel heard about it the same way he heard about most things that week through his phone, which had not stopped being a source of information he hadn't asked for and consequences he hadn't expected. Patricia Okafor called him at 7:18 a.m. while he was making Emma's breakfast and listening to the radio, out of habit. "Blake's been indicted," she said, without preamble, because she had learned quickly that Daniel Carter did not need things softened. 4 counts: negligent falsification of safety documentation, obstruction of a regulatory process, and 2 counts tied to the deaths of Margaret Ossie and Paul Reyes. The DA went harder than anyone anticipated. Daniel turned the stove down. He stood in the kitchen with the spatula in his hand. "The signature," he said. "Page 47, Patricia confirmed. The prosecutor specifically cited it in the charging document. She called it willful misclassification of a known safety risk. She used the word willful 4 times in the press statement. She was not being subtle. He set the spatula down on the counter. He looked out the kitchen window. The morning was gray and ordinary, and going on regardless. "What about Sophia?" he asked. Patricia paused in the way she paused when the answer was complicated. The DA made a distinction. "She's cooperating fully, full document preservation, full testimony access, the works. More importantly, there's a clear documentary record showing she made her decisions based on incomplete information that Blake's team controlled." Another pause. "She's not being charged. But the civil liability exposure for Whitmore Aviation is significant. That's a separate process. It's going to take time." "What about the families?" he asked. "Margaret Ossie's son. Paul Reyes's girlfriend. Patricia Okafor is handling their representation too," she said. "And before you ask, yes, at the same rate I'm charging you." He almost smiled. Which is nothing, she confirmed. "Go eat your breakfast, Daniel. Today is a good day, in the specific way that good days feel, when they've been a long time coming." He hung up. He stood in the kitchen. He looked at the spatula. He picked it up and finished making the eggs. Emma came down at 7:30 in her school clothes, hair still loose, carrying her 747 model in one hand and her backpack in the other. She dropped both on a chair, sat down at the table, looked at the eggs, looked at him. "You have that face," she said. "What face?" "The one where something big happened and you're deciding how to tell me." He put the plate in front of her. He sat down across from her. He told her about the indictment in straightforward language, without performance, the same way he'd always talked to her. Like she was someone capable of handling the truth, which she was. She listened. She ate 2 bites of egg. Then she said, "So Mr. Blake is going to court." "Yes, because of what he signed." Because of what he signed, and what he knew when he signed it. She thought about this. She moved her fork around the plate. "Do you feel better?" she asked. Not triumphant, not excited. Just asking. She genuinely wanted to know. He considered the question honestly. He thought about Blake in his expensive suit, saying you created a liability. He thought about the 2 counts tied to people who had names and sons and girlfriends. "I feel like the right thing is happening," he said. "That's different from feeling better." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, like that made complete sense to her. She picked up her fork and kept eating. That was Emma. That had always been Emma. The NTSB formal findings came 3 weeks later. Daniel sat with Patricia in a federal building conference room and listened to Harlan walk through them for 40 minutes. The cascade failure sequence, the fuel transfer interruption at altitude, the pressure valve overload, the structural sequence of events that had produced exactly the outcome Daniel had described, in the exact order he had described it, in 15 simulations that nobody with authority had chosen to act on. Harlan set his folder down at the end and looked at Daniel directly. "Your methodology was correct," he said. "Your findings were accurate. Your complaint was filed in time to have prevented this flight. The failure to act on that complaint will be the subject of a separate regulatory review of the FAA processing officer involved. He paused. I want to say that on record, in this room, in front of your attorney, because I think you deserve to hear it stated clearly by someone with the authority to state it. Daniel sat with that for a moment. 11 months of work. 8 internal reports before he even got to the FAA. 15 simulations, all of it accurate, all of it in time. He thought about June 14th. He thought about the smoke on the horizon, rising into a clear blue sky. He thought about what it cost to be right when nobody was listening. Thank you, he said. Harlan nodded. He closed his folder. He looked like he wanted to say something else and was choosing not to, and Daniel respected that too. On the drive home from that meeting, Patricia said, from the passenger seat, you know what happens next. Reinstatement, he said. Reinstatement, full back pay, restoration of your professional record, and removal of every notation the company made about the circumstances of your termination. She pulled a document from her bag and held it on her knee without opening it yet. Whitmore Aviation's legal team sent this over this morning. It's a settlement offer. I want you to read it tonight, when Emma's asleep, and call me in the morning. He glanced at it. The envelope was thick. Whatever was inside, it was detailed. How is it? He asked. It's serious, she said. They're being serious. And the families, Osi and Reyes? Separate negotiation further along. Also serious. She put the envelope back in her bag. Read yours tonight. Then we'll talk. He drove. The city went past the windows. He thought about $9 an hour. He thought about asthma medication at $400 a month. He thought about Emma's smiley face sandwich wrapper, and the paper airplanes in his notes, and a cardboard box in a parking lot with a model of the WA-4 sticking out over the top. He didn't open the envelope that night. He read Emma 2 chapters. He turned her light off. He sat at the kitchen table and he looked at the envelope for a while. Then he called Marcus. Marcus answered on the second ring. It was late, almost 10, but he answered immediately, which meant he'd been waiting. Did you get the offer? Marcus said. Patricia brought it today. And I haven't opened it. Silent. Then Danny. I know. You have a daughter who needs asthma medication and you've been delivering packages for 4 months. Open the envelope. I will, Daniel said. I just needed to call you first. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Why? Daniel looked at the kitchen table. At the spot where Emma had put her model airport 3 weeks ago, where they'd made paper planes and she'd asked him if he'd missed it. At the coffee mug that had been on his desk for 11 years and was now on his kitchen table because there was nowhere else for it to go. Because you're the only person besides Emma who knows what the past 4 months actually looked like from the inside, he said. And I needed someone to know that I'm about to open it. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had something in it that Daniel recognized from the doorway the day he packed the box. Open it, he said quietly. You earned everything in there and more. Daniel opened the envelope. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked at the kitchen wall and breathed slowly for a minute. Then he called Patricia. She picked up immediately, which also meant she'd been waiting. Well, she said. It's more than I expected, he said. Yes, she said. The reinstatement terms are clean. Very, and the number. He stopped. The number, Patricia said carefully, is what happens when a company's legal team looks at a grand jury indictment, an NTSB finding, 41 internal documents, and a video with 40 million views and calculates what a jury would do. He sat with that, 40 million views. He had stopped looking at the view count weeks ago because looking at it made him feel like the story was about something other than what it was about. But he understood what it represented. He understood the math. There's one condition I want to add, he said. Tell me. The families get a separate conversation that has nothing to do with mine. No package deal, no tying the Osi and Reyes settlements to my cooperation. They get what they get on the merit of what happened to them. Independently, Patricia was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, that's already how it's structured. But I'm glad you said it anyway. He nodded to himself. Then I'll sign, he said. 3 weeks after that, Sophia Whitmore resigned as CEO of Whitmore Aviation. She did it by letter to the board, which was not standard practice for a CEO-level departure, and the letter was 3 paragraphs. The third paragraph was the one that every journalist in the country pulled and ran. It said, in full, "I leave this company, believing that the culture I was raised in, and that I in turn maintained and enforced, prioritized financial performance over the people responsible for it and endangered by it. That culture produced the conditions in which Daniel Carter's warnings went unheeded and 2 people lost their lives. I am not able to lead a company whose correction I cannot guarantee, and I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of continuity." The board accepted the resignation and released a statement saying they were committed to a new culture of safety and accountability, which was the kind of statement boards release when they have no other options. Daniel read the letter at the kitchen table while Emma was at school. He read the third paragraph twice. He thought about what Catherine Whitmore had said outside the hospital room door. "She is trying." He thought about the hospital room, the expression that had broken open when Sophia saw his hands. He thought about the 2 words she'd said when she recognized him in the smoke. You, just that one word. All the recognition and the impossibility and the specific human moment of it contained in one syllable. He folded the printout and put it in the drawer where he kept things that mattered. Emma's drawings. Sarah's watch that he'd never been able to wear but couldn't put away. The model of the WA4 was on top of the refrigerator now, where it had been since he took it out of the box. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up, because unknown numbers had been a full-time occupation since June, and he was tired of it. But something made him answer, "Mr. Carter." A man's voice. Older, measured, with the particular steadiness of someone who has spent a career making large decisions. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm the chairman of the Meridian Aerospace Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with us." Daniel sat up slightly. "I am," he said. Meridian was one of the oldest aviation safety foundations in the country. Independent, well-funded, known for funding both research and the people who did it. "I've been following your situation closely," Vance said. "I've spoken with several people in the industry about you, including 2 former FAA commissioners and a former NTSB board member. The characterization I keep hearing is consistent, so I'll just tell you what it is. They describe you as the kind of engineer who comes along rarely enough that when the industry loses one, it feels it." He paused. "We'd like to offer you a position. Research Director for Aviation Safety Systems. You'd be building a team, designing the methodology, and working specifically on the kind of masked fault detection that the XW9 case has brought to national attention." Daniel sat very still. "The position comes with a lab," Vance continued. "Funding for a team of 6 to start. Full publication rights on any findings. And this part was specifically important to several of the people I spoke with. Complete independence. No corporate oversight on your research conclusions. None." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. "The WA4 model sat on top of it, Mr. Vance," Daniel said. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why now?" "The industry knew the XW9 report existed. The FAA had my complaint for 3 months." A pause. "Not sensitive. More like a man who had been expecting the question and decided the honest answer was the only one worth giving. Because the industry needed a disaster to pay attention," Vance said. "And I am not proud of that. None of us should be. Part of what we're trying to build with this position is a structure that means the next Daniel Carter doesn't have to wait for a crash to be heard." Another pause. "I understand if that makes the offer complicated." Daniel looked at the table. He thought about the word complicated, and about how many complicated things he had learned to hold at the same time over the past year. About how being right too early looked exactly like being wrong, from the outside, until the disaster arrived to sort out the difference. "I'll need to think about it," he said. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. I have one condition that I'd want to discuss before anything else." "Name it." "The position includes working with active regulatory agencies. Not advising. actually working with access to complaint queues, with the ability to flag and escalate, with enough institutional weight, that when an engineer files a report, there's a human being on the other end, who is accountable for what happens to it. Silence on the line, a longer one this time. That would require some structural conversations with the FAA, Vance said. I know, Daniel said. It's not impossible. I know that too. Another pause. Then Arthur Vance said something Daniel hadn't expected. He laughed. Not a big laugh. A quiet one, the laugh of a man who has been in rooms full of people who didn't ask for what they actually needed, and who found it genuinely refreshing when someone did. I'll make some calls, Vance said. Can we speak again Thursday? Thursday works, Daniel said. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. He thought about Marcus's text from the night of the crash. It needs to have everything, so that nobody can say it was disgruntled employees making things up. He thought about Claire Hayden's voice on the phone, the morning of June 14th, saying, "The time for managing this is ending." He thought about Harlan in the conference room, saying, "Your findings were accurate. Your complaint was filed in time." He thought about what it would mean to build a room where the next complaint didn't get lost in an inbox for 3 months, where the next engineer didn't have to become a delivery driver to find out if the system could hear him. He thought about Emma. He got up and called her school on the landline. "Paula, it's Daniel Carter. Can you give Emma a message?" He paused. "Tell her dad is going to be an engineer again." Paula said she absolutely would. Paula sounded like she might be smiling. 2 months later, on a Thursday morning in late August, Daniel Carter walked into a building he'd never been in before and shook Arthur Vance's hand with his right hand, the one that still had faint scar tissue across the palm from the emergency door handle on June 14th. He noticed Vance's eyes go to the hand and hold there for a moment. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did Daniel. The position was real, the lab was real. The team of 6 included Marcus Webb, who had resigned from Whitmore Aviation 2 days after sending 41 documents to Claire Hayden, and who had been doing consulting work and waiting to see what Daniel was going to do next. When Daniel called him about the position, Marcus said yes before Daniel finished the sentence. He also called Claire Hayden, not to offer her a job, to thank her. She told him she'd been thanked more than enough, and what she actually wanted was first access when the Meridian findings were ready for publication. "Done," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I covered the story properly." He hadn't expected to laugh. He laughed. The FAA agreement came through 6 weeks after that. It took 4 meetings and 2 conference calls with regulatory officials who initially described what Daniel was proposing as unprecedented, and eventually described it as necessary, which was the kind of change that happens when the NTSB finding, and a grand jury and 40 indictment and 40 million video views are all pointing in the same direction at the same time. The complaint review position that Daniel designed put a credentialed systems engineer in the loop for every airframe safety complaint above a threshold of technical specificity. It put a 48-hour acknowledgement requirement on those complaints and a 30-day review deadline. It created an escalation pathway that went directly to the NTSB when the review identified what Daniel had named, in his design document, a masked fault indicator. He named it after what had killed the XW9. He named it after the specific kind that hides itself in acceptable variance and waits for the conditions that will make it catastrophic. He named the indicator protocol the Masked Fault Early Alert System. The acronym was MIMFIAS. His team called it something else, informally, among themselves. They called it the Carter Protocol. He found out about that on a Tuesday morning when Marcus let it slip accidentally, and he sat in his office for a minute after Marcus left and looked at his hands and thought about that. He didn't know what to say about it. He wasn't sure you were supposed to say anything when something like that happened. He thought maybe you were just supposed to keep doing the work. So he did. In October, almost once after the crash, his phone rang on a Sunday morning. Emma was at the kitchen table, working on a school project. He was making coffee. He looked at the number and almost didn't recognize it. He'd seen it once before in March, on a termination document. He answered, Daniel. Sophia's voice, steadier than it had been in the hospital. Different than it had been on the 9th floor. A voice that had been through something, and come out to the other side changed. Sophia, he said, a pause. I heard about the Meridian position. And the FAA agreement. Another pause. I heard they're calling it the Carter Protocol. I didn't name it that, he said. I know, she said. That's how you know it's the right name. He turned away from Emma, not because he was hiding the call, but because he needed a moment to settle his own expression into something that wasn't too much to explain to a 10-year-old. Are you okay? He asked. Getting there, Sophia said. It's slower than I expected, getting there. But yes, she paused. I wanted to call because I have something to tell you, and I decided it needed to be a phone call. Not an email, not through lawyers. Okay, he said. I'm starting something new, she said. Not a big company. Small, 6 people, maybe 8 eventually. Independent safety certification consulting. Specifically for new airframe programs in the certification phase. Her voice was careful, but there was something alive in it, the same quality he'd heard in Arthur Vance's laugh. The quality of someone who has found the thing they're supposed to be doing after a long time of doing something else. The whole model is built around exactly what the XW9 case exposed. An outside voice in the room before the plane flies. Someone whose paycheck doesn't depend on the timeline. He leaned against the kitchen counter. He looked at the WA4 model on top of the refrigerator. That's a good idea, he said. I know it is, she said. Without arrogance, just plainly. I've spent a lot of the last 4 months figuring what I was actually at and what I was doing. Because my father expected it, and those aren't the same list. She paused. I wanted to ask you something. Ask, he said. Would you be willing to sit on the advisory board? Not a full role. I know you have the Meridian work. Just your name on the paper and your availability to review methodology when I have questions. She stopped. I want to build this right. That's not something I can say I always cared about before. I care about it now. And I would rather build it right with you in the room than build it in a way that you'd look at and find insufficient. The kitchen was quiet. Emma was working at the table, head down, pencil moving. Outside the window, the October morning was bright and cold, the kind of morning that feels like a clean start. Daniel thought about a lot of things in the space of a few seconds. He thought about what it meant that the woman who fired him was building something whose entire reason for existing was to prevent what she had done. He thought about the 2 names, Margaret and Paul, and the weight of them, and whether any of it was enough, and whether enough was even the right question. He thought about what Emma had said in the van on June 14th. I think things are going to be different now. He thought about what it meant to choose to believe in someone's change. Not to forget, not to minimize, but to look at what a person is building and decide whether it's real, and act accordingly. He thought that was one of the harder things in a life. Maybe the hardest. And that doing it anyway was what separated people who were good from people who just wanted to be called good. Yes, he said, I'll be on the board, Sophia breathed out. He heard it. Thank you, she said. Build it right, he said. I will, she said. And then after a pause, I know you'll tell me when I'm not. He almost smiled. Count on it, he said. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen. Emma looked up from her project. She had the pencil behind her ear, and her hair half-tied, and her mother's exact expression when she was paying attention to something she hadn't been told to pay attention to. Was that her? Emma asked. He looked at his daughter. Almost 10 years old now, in the way that almost 10 looks right before it becomes 10, the last of the child and the first of something else, all in the same face at the same time. Yeah, he said. What did she want? She's starting something new. She wanted me to help. Emma considered this with total seriousness. She tapped the pencil on the table twice. Then, are you going to? Yes, he said. She nodded once. She went back to her project. She worked for a few seconds and then said, without looking up, I think that's right, Dad. He looked at her. At the top of her head, the dark hair, the careful way she held the pencil. He thought about a 747 model in a school parking lot. about eggs half-cooked on a stove, about a cardboard box and a parking lot, and a man who sat in his car for 22 minutes and then drove to pick up his daughter. About a morning in August when he walked into a new building and shook a man's hand with a scarred palm and started doing the work he was always supposed to be doing. About a girl who asked him once if he was still an engineer, and to whom he'd said, "I'm still your dad," and who had seemed to understand that both things were true and that neither one canceled the other. He poured his coffee. He sat down at the table across from her. She was working on something about weather systems, clouds, fronts, pressure differentials. The way air moved. He looked at it for a moment. "You have the isobar lines wrong," he said gently. She looked at her paper. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm an engineer," he said. She grinned. It was Sarah's grin. It had always been Sarah's grin, and it had never once in his life failed to make him feel like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. She slid the paper across the table. "Fix it," she said. He picked up the pencil with his scarred right hand, the one that had forced the emergency door, the one that had carried Lily Chen through the smoke, the one that had held his daughter's hand at a graveside in the rain, and made a promise he had kept every single day since. He fixed the isobar lines. He handed the paper back. She looked at it, nodded with the satisfaction of someone checking work that has been done correctly, and kept going. And Daniel Carter, engineer, father, the man who ran toward the fire when everyone else ran away, sat at his kitchen table on an October morning and drank his coffee and watched his daughter draw the way air moves. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt like something he was building rather than something being done to him. That was enough. That was everything.